Hello and welcome to Meeting Midway, Tier 2 Prevention, hosted by the Missouri Department of Mental Health. My name is Carl Honecker, and I will be your chaperone as we walk together through Tier 2 supports. What is it? How does it work? What does it use, and how do we use it? Together, we'll do a deep dive with each episode into this topic to gain greater knowledge about this subject. At the end of each episode, it's hoped that you'll have a greater understanding about Tier 2 supports and see how it relates to your daily lives. And with that, let's move on to the show. On today's show, we'll be discussing the Crisis Intervention Team program that reaches nearly 2,700 communities nationwide according to the National Alliance on Mental Health. Based on what we've reviewed for the show, CIT assists and trains law enforcement and first responders on how to handle crises involving individuals with varying mental health issues. The goal of CIT Train is to equip trained individuals with the knowledge and resources to de-escalate situations by understanding some common characteristics and/or signs of mental illness and crisis situations. The program itself is an investment not only into those who receive the training, but also the community at large. Today, our guest will highlight the overall training provided within this program, but also highlight his role in educating attendees about responding to crisis involving individuals with developmental disabilities. We hope you add this show to a list of resources your organization uses and utilize this incredible resource if offered in your community. And with that, let's move on to the show. All right, so let's just jump into it. Joining us today is Chad Reyes, a seasoned expert in CIT training and an employee at the Missouri Department of Mental Health. Chad has participated in teaching CIT to law enforcement officers for several years now within the Kansas City area. Chad, welcome to the show. Can you start by sharing a little bit about yourself and your professional background and your work with CIT?
Yeah, for sure. Hello, Carl, and thanks for having me on here today. So my current position is the Western Region Behavior Analyst for the Missouri Department of Mental Health. And I work on the Division of Developmental Disabilities side. My position on the Tier 3 team, what I do is I work with and provide consultation to many teams across the state that support individuals who are at high risk and engage in some pretty extreme problem behaviors, like high rates of property destruction, physical aggression, self-injurious behavior, fecal manipulation and smearing, elopement, etc. Due to the extreme nature of behaviors like these, it can be real challenging for providers to support these folks at times. And unfortunately, it's not uncommon for many of them to end up in hospitals, jails, and even homeless shelters for periods of time. So that being said, this is sort of how my work crosses over with law enforcement. I attended my first CIT basic course back in 2017, and I really enjoyed it when I went through the course. I loved what it had to offer, and immediately afterwards, I volunteered to help teaching it. So I've been doing that ever since.
Thank you for that intro. So you've been doing CIT for about ballpark of 7 to 8 years now. Yeah. You seem like the perfect guest to help our listeners understand about CIT. So we know what CIT stands for. It stands for Crisis Intervention Team. But can you dive a little bit more into the training itself? I mean, what does it involve? How long does it typically take for someone to complete the training?
Sure. So the training itself, basic course, is a week long. It's 40 hours, so it's super packed full the entire week. They learn about a wide variety of mental health disorders. They learn about hospital procedures. There's a section on trauma-informed care. They go through suicide interventions. They learn about various medications and side effects. There's a section on implicit biases with vulnerable populations. They do approximately 5 hours of de-escalation training. And then also they have an opportunity to do on-site visits at various mental health facilities. And they have the opportunity to speak to consumer panels whenever they do those visits also. A part of the course And what I teach is a section on intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that's a 2 hour block of instruction. I do that on day one. And then later on in the week, I come back and I spend like an additional 4 hours with them. That part of it, I help facilitate role play scenarios.
So you said it's a week long, and it's really just it sounds like a really full spectrum training on a lot of different topics that law enforcement officers, because it is for you, I believe, just for law enforcement officers. Please correct me if I'm wrong there. And I really like the fact that they actually have that on the hands training with the role plays that you do. And you mentioned some interaction, it sounds like, with the community as well. So I really do like that. I mean, am I in this right ball field there?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say it is a very comprehensive course that they go through, and it's really they run the whole gamut of mental health needs and supports. So it's really cool.
Excellent. So I guess my next question is, in your opinion, what are some of the key benefits from CIT training? I mean, how does it help officers or first responders? Because I believe it goes beyond officers to be more effective in crisis situations. And I'm sorry, this is kind of a loaded question. Is this training exclusively only to law enforcement? Because I saw a couple of things where other first responders like firefighters and paramedics can participate too. So can you just kind of clarify that?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say the majority of the participants in the course are officers, but it is also open to other professionals such as firefighters, paramedics, mental health professionals, social workers. And, we get security officers, jailers. There's even a special course that they do on telecommunications, where you got 911 call takers and dispatchers. So yeah, I mean, it's open to a lot more than just law enforcement. Yeah, I mean, the training, it provides our officers with skill not only to recognize signs of mental health crisis or condition, but to then effectively de-escalate that situation. So by them applying the skills that they learn in the course, it frequently leads to better outcomes for the individuals in crisis because it helps them get them connected with the appropriate resources rather than using unnecessary force and taking them to jail. The training, it upholds a high level of officer safety on one end, but also it incorporates techniques that are centered in compassion and empathy, which goes a very long way whenever you're in a crisis scenario. And it can help prevent people from getting hurt or hurt worse. Another thing that I think is real beneficial is the increased positive interactions that the training promotes. So naturally, it helps to foster better relationships between law enforcement and the community at large.
Okay, yeah, and I love the fact that you brought up I wrote down on my little notes here, force on force, where coming in, officers may not know what they're getting into, and just taking that step back and essentially expanding their vision or senses, they can get a better understanding of the situation to, one, keep them safe, but also the individual or the people around there safe by having that positive element to build that relationship so that it doesn't escalate, hopefully, to a situation where someone could unfortunately get hurt, or resources could be implemented or used where unfortunately someone has to go to the hospital or they have to go to the jail or something like that, where, and not to say that those situations aren't necessary at times, but just I think the key component here is just expanding the sense of the officers and the first responders to understand, again, to keep them safe and to not, this may sound like a horrible explanation, but not have two bulls going at it and someone getting hurt eventually.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, another thing to take into consideration whenever you're talking about law enforcement is that oftentimes, I mean, they already have a bit of a bad rap. They come in and based on a person's history or experience with law enforcement, they may already have their mind made up about how they're going to respond when that officer shows up. And so it's really important for our officers to have these additional skills within their repertoire so they can come on scene and already be prepared to receive some of that negative backlash and already be prepared for that and kind of have a jump on it.
All right. So, I mean, it really does sound like CIT places a very strong emphasis on communication and building, I guess, almost brief relationships to de-escalate situations. I mean, this very much reminds me, and we've kind of touched upon it in other episodes, the Tools of Choice program offered by the Missouri Department of Mental Health. Would you say that these programs kind of complement each other? And if so, how? Because I know that you, a little bit more backstory on Chad. He was on Tier 1, so I'm sure he knows a little bit more about Tools of Choice than he's letting on. So, but yeah, if you want to take it from there.
Yeah, that's a great question. And absolutely, Carl. In fact, I would say that many of the universal strategies in Tools of Choice are actually some of the same exact skills that are taught throughout the CIT course to our officers. I would say that there's a strong emphasis on the stay close hot skills when it comes to de-escalation. I mentioned they go through approximately 5 hours of de-escalation techniques, which is a lot. But yeah, I mean, it's all of a lot of the same skills that you see in Tools of Choice. We're looking at body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, being able to provide empathy statements, etc. But they're also taught to be aware of how our own behavior can make situations worse, and the importance of being able to avoid that. They're also taught when and how to provide positive consequences. And a big component is focused on establishing trust and rapport by creating those meaningful interactions, similar to what you would do whenever you're having those stay close cool moments. But yeah, you're right though. I mean, it is, generally the time spent on scene isn't an extended period of time where brief interactions, they got to use those skills and they got to do the best that they can to establish rapport, to build trust, to really develop that relationship in a brief period of time.
Okay, so now I know you play a very specific role in CIT training. You mentioned that earlier. You focus more on the intellectual disability section. I think you said it's about 2 hours long, and you also lead the scenario-based role play section. What are some of the key topics you cover in these areas of the training, and why are they critical to the program's success? Why do you think that they are so needed? I mean, I think we can kind of guess, but I want to just hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, sure. So just to kind of describe a little bit about the sections that I have. So in the didactic portion that I teach on IDD, it's really, 2 hours isn't a long, isn't a lot of time. So really it's an overview that teaches awareness for our populations of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We go over information on some of the more common diagnoses that an officer may encounter, along with signs and symptoms that they could expect to see. They're taught about various types of communication that some of our individuals use, like picture exchange communication systems, communication devices. We discuss sensory differences, potential deficits with social skills and language processing, crisis intervention strategies. And, they also learn about different settings and environments that they may respond to, like group homes and ISLs. And even, we touch on the role of the direct support professional and what they could expect, if they were to encounter a DSP. And then also, we provide them with community resources that are available for our population as well. As far as the role play scenarios go, this is where, and it's funny because in these courses, like that's what the officers are most nervous about, right? They're like, oh, we don't, they don't want to do role plays, and everyone's like super hesitant about it. And because it is, I mean, it's, you can practice all day long and you can be super good at these skills, but as soon as you step into a role play, man, it's like Mike Tyson says, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And I feel like stepping into a role play is a little bit like that, but it's an opportunity for them to display all the skills that they learned throughout the week. There's a bunch of scenarios that we run, but all of them are realistic crisis situations that they likely will encounter at some point being an officer. Maybe not all of them, but definitely there's a good possibility that they could encounter any given scenario. Myself and my team of actors here in the Kansas City area will act as though we are in the crisis and somebody called 911. So the officers respond. They have to use their skills to de-escalate the situation, to provide support, and to offer the appropriate resources based on what the scenario is. And we respond accordingly. So if they're using the skills that they learned and they're doing well, naturally over time, as we progress through the role play, we will de-escalate and cooperate or receive that support from them. If they are being coercive and not using the appropriate skills, then generally we will escalate further. So, and then afterwards, there's always a debrief session too, where they have an opportunity to receive feedback from role players. And then there's also evaluators in there. There's always a mental health professional along with an officer that are doing the evaluations too. So they're able to really look at it from a mental health standpoint, and then also they are evaluated on their officer safety as well.
All right, yeah, and just you saying all that, it brings back a lot of conversations that I think may have had with you or from other people. But I like the part where with the IDD part that you mentioned, you talk about. I wrote a few things down, different types of communication, sensory things, different diagnoses. I think it may have been you where you mentioned that if a child who may have autism goes missing, they are more prone to going towards a water source and things like that. And
Yeah.
I think we had that conversation there. And so just having that knowledge for the officer to go to that place first, I think is really key and beneficial. But also the role plays, I mean, they essentially just sound like a competency check to make sure that one, the officers were paying attention, and two, of course, that they can use the skills that they learn through the course. I mean, am I in the right ball field there?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're spot on with that. And for sure, like during the didactic portion, we make sure to provide any kind of tips or ideas for the officers when it relates to our population too, so that they can be more successful whenever they do get those calls. So definitely, like the thing that you mentioned about water and wandering, for sure, like that's something that we teach to the officers to check if there's large bodies of water nearby and the person hasn't eloped and hasn't been seen in a while. Like definitely that's a good place to go check. Other things, like when it comes to sensory and stuff like that, we recommend officers, if they have the ability, to kill their lights before they show up, or turn off their sirens, if they don't need those. Same thing, like if they have the ability to put certain possessions out of reach. So like if they got a shiny badge that's hanging around their neck, like tuck that into your shirt if you can. Same thing with shiny handcuffs, things like that. And we mix that in throughout the training as well. I didn't mention this earlier, but in that section of it, I usually teach it with a CIT officer here in Kansas City who has a son that's with autism. And so we teach that together as a tandem. And so I'm able to provide a lot of scenarios from a mental health perspective, and he has actual real life experiences raising his child that is really beneficial for the officers to hear about too. And he's got like a picture exchange communication system that he used with his son and everything. So he passes that around the class and everything, and they can actually see what he used. So it works pretty well.
So, and I'm just curious about this. Can you possibly give maybe 2 examples of scenarios that you would do during a role play? I mean, I think this might help listeners retain and visualize more the whole training process and give a little bit of knowledge about what officers may encounter in these different situations.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we've got about 15-ish different scenarios. And generally what we do is we'll kind of tailor them based on who the officers are that are showing up on scene. So if it's an officer that's working in a jail or something like that, we'll set up the scenario so that it's like, yeah, two inmates in the day room or something like that. If it's a security officer working at a hospital, we'll have a scenario where a person is in crisis, like in the parking lot or something like that. But the scenarios really range. We do some on like domestic disturbance. We've got one with an aggressive adult with autism that's living with his or her parents. We've got a suicidal person on a bridge, a person in a park hearing voices and claiming to be Jesus Christ. We do one with an individual that eloped from their group home. Yeah, so there's a lot of different scenarios, and one of the ones that I like doing, I'll kind of give you more information on it, but there's 2 siblings that are living at home. It's either brother and sister, or 2 brothers or 2 sisters, but basically one of them calls 911 because they're claiming that this guy down the street, and we always, whatever, that we just make up names and stuff, but this guy Bob that lives down the street has been stealing my packages off my front porch. And so the officers show up on scene, and the guy in crisis is like, yeah, this guy keeps on stealing all my packages. And they're like, okay, well, what was in it? And they're like, did you have a Ring camera, or do you have a footage of this? And we're like, yeah, I bought this Ring camera and I had footage of it, but this guy's been hacking into my Wi-Fi, and he got my password and he deleted the footage. So like I had it, and my brother will tell you, my brother saw it, didn't he? And like the brother's like trying not to upset the other sibling, but like he knows that there was no footage of it, but like he's got to live there, right? When the officers leave, they're still living in that same house. As they go more into the role play, the person in crisis reveals that this person, Bob, also is slithering up through his vents in the middle of the night and whispering all these demonic things in his ear when he's trying to sleep. So he hasn't slept for several days, and now he hasn't been to work, in 3 or 4 days. And so he's at risk of losing his job. And so but usually whenever this kind of information comes out, it's like an aha moment for the officers, right? They're like, oh, okay. So maybe Bob doesn't actually exist here. And so we got to take a different approach here. We're not going to go down there and file a report for him stealing packages. Like, this is something else that we need to address. And there are probably other resources and different approach that we need to take to the situation.
Yeah. And in preparation for this interview, because I know you're the perfect guest for this show, but I did read a couple of articles where it did say that, and it may have been skewed, but it was like 1 or 2 articles where CIT officers actually have lower events of arrest, but they offer more resources and they offer more things that eventually, in theory, save the town, county, state, whatever, more funds and resources for the individuals who actually do need those resources. So, I mean, in that scenario, just trying to give that person a little bit of resources and understanding that there may be other things going on, and not necessarily just take them to a hospital and do that and force them, but rather work with them wherever they are at and try and get them the help that they need, and pray and hope that they take it, of course. So
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't see me on this, but I'm clapping over here right now because absolutely, I love hearing that, and I think ultimately that's one of the main goals throughout this whole program, right? We want to be able to help as many people as we can.
So now my next question is, and just because I'm a little curious, as we know, if we get trained on something, if we don't use it, we tend to lose it, or certain things are kind of lost over time just because we're human. But I mean, the approach to CIT training, is it a one and done program, or are there like additional resources or refresher courses that people who have gone through it can take it again or be encouraged to take it again? And I guess my other question is, how do we ensure that people who have gone through the coursework and completed it stay as up to date as possible, and kind of the same realm of staying updated on the knowledge and skills that they've developed?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. And as of right now, there's not really any sort of recertification that's required after completing the course. That being said, an officer definitely is welcome to come back through again. I mean, as long as they get it cleared with their supervisor. But what we do see is a lot of officers are taking advantage of additional advanced CIT courses that are offered throughout the year. And to name a couple of those, there's one specific to youth, and there's another one specific to veterans. And that the information taught in those are different and tailored to those groups. I will add that after the course, there's sort of ongoing coaching that happens each time that an officer responds to an individual with a mental health crisis. The officer is required to fill out a CIT report. Those then get received by the CIT department and are debriefed with the officer. If after those reports are processed and there's still additional supports that the officer maybe missed or didn't provide, then someone from that CIT department will reach out and make those connections as needed. For example, with that, I often receive calls about individuals in the Kansas City area with IDD that an officer responded to, where they'll say, hey, this is what happened. Here's how the officer responded. How else can we help this person or this family? Or what other resources do you know of that we can link them up with? So,
Okay, yeah, and I love that part where, I mean, it's individual based, but basically that check to make sure that we're still doing it the way that we would like to do it, the way that we would not creep in. I think you used the word, I'm going to flub it real quick, cor- cor- coercive actions. I can't say that word very clearly.
yeah.
But yeah, just making sure that those don't trickle back in, because we do tend to react in moments. And if we don't have the training to take a step back and remind us, then little bits of errors, I guess you can call it, sleep in. And so I just love the part that there's that willingness to make sure that we're doing the job as effectively as possible to keep ourselves safe and also the community safe there.
Yeah. And I will say, just to kind of add on to that, historically, and I mean, you probably know this just from attending trainings and stuff and being involved in any trainings, it's if I'm forcing people to go through the training, there's going to be folks who don't want to do it just because they're being forced to do it. So, the whole idea of being voluntold to do something. So, and I know that departments kind of have a different approach on this across the state, but in Kansas City, it's my time in working with CIT, it's been volunteer on a voluntary basis. And so I think the folks that you have there, for the most part, want to be there, right? They want to learn these skills. They want additional tools in their tool belt. They want to be able to handle these challenging, complex situations. Now, that being said, I think throughout the years, it's been realized just how impactful this training has been. And so instead of, now mandating that everybody take this training after already being an officer, what we're working on doing now is incorporating it into a part of their training at the academy. So even as recruits, now we've got multiple classes of recruits that are coming through, and that's a part of their initial training that they receive. So
Yeah, and I think that's really awesome that Kansas City is doing that. I mean, here in St. Louis, I don't know quite the structure of how things go, but I do know when I was a case manager back in the days, for certain cases, we always made sure that there was at least one or two CIT officers that we were aware of in the area of St. Louis that I had cases.
yeah.
And, we just made sure that if things should arise, that ideally this officer be involved to help the situation. I mean, I'm not going to go into details because of HIPAA and all this and all that, but we didn't have that resource. Now that leads into my almost to last question, basically. Because we're wrapping up the podcast, how can listeners find out who are CIT trained individuals within their communities? And then to further that, is there any way for the public or even ISL staff, direct support staff or group home staff to locate these resources?
Yeah, good question. So, you always contact your local police department by phoning in on the non-emergency line and inquire about their crisis intervention team if they have one. I know not all of the departments are up to speed on this. It just depends kind of on resources and where their program's at. Like a lot of the rural areas don't have a ton of CIT officers, but they're definitely moving towards having more all over the state. So also, most chapters have their own websites, if you will. So here in Kansas City, you could just do a Google search and put in Kansas City CIT, and it'll pop up a web page, which also has a very robust community resource guide on that website. You could also reach out to local mental health providers and ask them about CIT programs. And additionally, and this is something that I always encourage the providers that we work with, is if there's a crisis situation involving one of our supported individuals and it requires 911 to respond, then they could always request that the dispatcher send a CIT trained officer.
Excellent. So I always end the show with kind of this last question here. So, and I do have one that I'll share as well, but I'll let you go first. Are there any resources or tools you'd recommend for someone interested in CIT training, or for individuals who just want to learn more about this topic?
Sure. I would say, so the website is going to be huge, but in addition to that, you could reach out to your local NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness chapter, and check your city government website for information on mental health initiatives and police programs. Most communities with CIT programs will list details about it on their official channels and sites. And then also, there's another good resource, and unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to attend this year, but they do an annual CIT conference here in Missouri, and it's in the spring usually. This year, I believe it's going to be on March 13th and 14th, and that's down at Margaritaville in the Ozarks. And the conference is put on by the Missouri Behavioral Health Council, and it's stacked with great speakers and lots of really good presentations lined up. So that's also a really good opportunity I would recommend.
All right. And Chad, I was going to say, you stole my thunder because that was the exact resource I was going to recommend to everybody. Yeah, it's the 2025 Missouri Crisis Intervention Team Conference. And like you said, during March 13th through the 14th, and we'll put a link to this conference in the show notes so that everyone who would like to attend and is able to attend to do so. And just to highlight some of the topics that they'll be doing, I'm just going to pick a random one here. Not just co-response, exploring the multifaceted role of mental health experts in police work. So it looks like some very good topics. And here's another one, Missouri crisis system of care collaboration for first responders. So I highly encourage anyone who is interested in either becoming a CIT member or who just wants to learn more about it to really consider this conference and sign up for that. Okay. Well, with that, Chad, I think we've talked about CIT a lot, but I think right now it's important for the listeners just to go out there and learn more about it themselves. So with that, I just want to thank you for joining the show today. And it's really evident that CIT really is making a difference in communities across the U.S. I think based on the research, there's 2,700 locations or CIT offices across the state. So they're doing great things, and I'm in full support of them. So again, thank you for being on the show.
Heck yeah, man. Absolutely. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this, and I'm really thankful that I have the opportunity in my position and in my career to be able to work with these officers and help teach them skills, in any capacity, really. And ultimately, it makes me happy knowing that the work that they do is making a positive impact, not only on our supported individuals, but really the whole community at large.
All right. And Chad Reyes, thanks for being on the show.
All right. Thank you so much, Carl. Appreciate it.
Hey everyone, this concludes our show. Thank you for stopping by to learn more about Tier 2 supports and taking a deep dive into this topic with me. If you enjoyed the show, learned something, or perhaps feeling generous, please feel free to hit the like and subscribe feature to receive additional information on shows as they come out in the near future. And with that, please remember to be hopeful, bold, and adventurous in all that you do. Take care, everyone. Bye.